Tuesday, March 18th, regular meeting of Fremont County School District Number 1 Board of Trustees, first order. As always, the first business item is Pledge of Allegiance. So, join me, please. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Great, thank you. You might have to bear with me. I sucked about half this kind bar into my lungs about 3 minutes ago, so I'll be coughing and sputtering up here for just a little bit until I get out of the way. Board member roll call. I believe we have everyone here with the exception of board member Scott Jensen, who is absent for work purposes. Are there any additional agenda items for this evening?
We need to move to the salary and benefits discussion.
Do we need to remove it?
You move it to the next section.
I think we're just going to talk about moving to the next section.
Okay.
It'll be a quick.
Talking, not talking, not.
Yeah, exactly.
Okay, thank you.
All right, hearing none, I'd like to do a motion for the adoption of the agenda. Second. Any discussion? All those in favor? Any opposed? Motion carries. All right, we'll do this in one batch if we could. I'd like to get approval of the minutes from February 18th and the approval of the minutes from March 4th special board meeting.
So moved. Second.
Is there any discussion on either of those items? Taylor?
Wasn't that, say, March 4th board meeting, so do you want me just to not vote on that, or since we're
Half close.
I can definitely.
Carol,
vote. That's okay with Carol.
we'll separate the two. What's that?
Whatever you want, I think it was so fast, so.
Okay, any other discussion? All those in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Motion carries. All right, Mr. Harris, recommendations.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. We have a lot to recognize and celebrate this evening. First of all, starting again at peak, we have some second graders in attendance. And we have Miss Sierra Alliance, their teacher. I don't know if anybody here has heard of the Reed Bowl before. You guys know. They know what it is because they're champions this year of Wyoming. They're the Wyoming State champions of the Reed Bowl. Does anybody in Miss Lyons' class want to tell us what the Reed Bowl is? I'm just asking for volunteers. I can tell you what it is, but okay. All right, so I'll start, and if I mess up, you guys can correct me. Okay? Got to take our all right.
Yeah, just step right up in front, fellas. You could, yep, grab that and just turn it on.
Push it up to turn on.
Okay, so you guys just tell us what your name is first, and then let us know what the project's all about.
My name is Bowie. My name is Tiny.
All right, so tell us about this project, gentlemen.
Reed Bowl is when you read, it's a competition around the world. There's school champions, there's state champions, there's country champions, and there's world champions. We got 63rd.
In the world?
And what is, for what? Is that because you read so many books, or, okay?
It's how much minutes?
How many minutes? Wow, you guys have probably read more than I have in my whole life.
How many minutes did you each read?
I read 7 or
many total minutes you read?
2,076.
More than that.
Dang it.
So each week, our class averaged about 17,000 to 20,000 minutes a week. So we counted minutes in the classroom for how much they read, and then minutes at home. So minutes in the classroom, we then got to multiply that by each kid. So each kid averaged about 200 to 300 minutes per week.
That's awesome.
Yeah. Including in the classroom. And Bowdoin said that we were 63rd. That was one of the weeks we were 63rd out of the whole nation. So out of all the states, we were 63rd. And then at the end of it, they have different conferences. So they have like K through 2nd grade is in a conference, and then 3rd through 5th, so on and so forth. So for our conference for the state of Wyoming, we read the most out of the state of Wyoming for minutes.
I think that deserves a big round of applause.
In Bowdoin, who did the regal? Like, what was it?
Dang it.
Malcolm Mitchell, and who is Malcolm Mitchell? He just,
A Super Bowl champion and an author.
yeah, so he was a Super Bowl champion, now he's an author, he just encourages reading throughout. Yeah, it's the 8th year this year. Pretty big deal, super proud of all of them.
Oh, yeah. Well, thank you guys for presenting.
Thanks, you guys. You get really good at what you practice. You guys are well on your way to becoming excellent readers, so nice work, Ms. Lyons and all of the kids in that class. Switching gears to LMS, some activities, updates, and recognition. LMS Nordic Skiing was on a tear this year. I don't know if anybody was noticing or paying attention, but it came to that, they had a state meet this year for middle school, and LMS completely dominated. I think if we broke it down by boys and girls teams at each grade level, we had multiple place winners in every single grade level for both boys and girls. Several first place winners. I mean, it was a stacked team. So the future looks bright for LPHS Nordic as well. Really excited to see those results. And then in LMS swimming, they also won the combined conference championship for boys and girls. And I was told this is the first year we had club swimming champions, middle school champions, and high school champions for both boys and girls ever. That anyone could tell. So, I mean, we don't slow down after 29 years of boys championships. It seems like it's just heating up even further. So, great job to those athletes at LMS. Another activity that I'm not sure many people even know exists at the middle school level is Future Business Leaders of America. There's a middle level state competition for that as well. We had 5 students who placed fourth, or we were fourth place in 5 events. So some of these are individual, some are team. And I didn't write down all the names because we'd be here for quite a while. There's a lot of kids doing it every day, which is a great thing. We had 4th place in 5 events, 3rd place in 9 events, 2nd place in 14 events, and 1st place in 12 events. So another dominating performance by LMS students in that, and there's a lot of skills that go into FBLA with preparing, presenting, and answering questions on the fly and things like that. It's really good skills that our middle school kids are building. So congrats to those folks too, and their coaches and sponsors. At LVHS, I wanted to highlight last weekend's Timeless Tales concert. Anybody get a chance to go see that? They put on a huge combined concert with current and former LVHS choir members, the Fremont County Orchestra, and the CWC Choir, and it was a packed house. They sold tickets for it. They sold 600 tickets, so it was packed to the rafters. There were 55 singers from LVHS there, and it looked like something you'd see in some major production somewhere. It was really first rate. They did music from The Lion King. Really good entertainment. I wanted to say thank you especially to Dr. Volbrecht, our choir director, and to Kirk Wendell, who's in charge of the sound and lighting for the auditorium, for making that such a success. It's just cool to see that come together. I think they only had 2 rehearsals because this is in addition to what they do for regular choir. So to get all those people literally playing the same note of music on the same page all at the same time is a huge accomplishment. There's more I could say about activities as well at the high school level. In the interest of time, we'll stop there. We have some information from Pathfinder by way of recognitions, but that's going to be later in the agenda under
back on that, for the cross-country skiing, I just wanted to let Mr. McCon know that's where you don't take the lift up.
Oh, yeah, that's like funny.
Yeah, that's kind of like running, so. Okay, public comment. Is there anyone that has public comment this evening on anything that is not on the agenda? Not on the agenda? Okay, is there anyone that has public comment on topics that are on the agenda? Okay, hearing none, we can move on. Programs, reports, and presentations. Board member reports.
Where's Mr. Newdorf? Is he back there somewhere hiding out? Board member reports. Brad, could you give us a little about the folks that came and visited your school the other day, and then I'll kind of finish it up for you, please?
Sure, Mr. Chair, members of the board. I like how you did that. Board member report. Brad, can you give my report? I would love to. We were honored to have the state superintendent, Megan Degenfelder, and some members of the Wyoming Department of Education on site to do what they're calling a tour of excellence. I think there's 2 high schools in the state through their several-week tour that they will traffic or stop by. Lander Valley High School is one of those. And so we were just able to show them some of the amazing things that are happening at LVHS, some of the things that don't get showcased a lot. For one example would be in our agriculture class, we have some new equipment that was purchased with some state grant funding, and that allows our students to be in a virtual reality heavy equipment operator. And so the superintendent was able to drive some heavy equipment and actually do some work on that. And then one of her department staff members also did some virtual reality welding, which is pretty lifelike, and the kids kind of taught them all of that. So they kind of just took the wheel and gave them the instruction and did that. So we're able to stop at 7, 8 different stops in the school throughout the tour and just kind of talk about the great things that are happening throughout the building.
Yeah, it was a really, really good opportunity to showcase Lander Valley High School with our state people. As a former teacher at Lander Valley High School for a couple of years, it's always really good when you see a place that continues to grow and continues to improve and continues to get better. And as a team, you always want to see things like that. So it was really fun for me to go through some of the process and see what the folks are doing in terms of teaching methods and teaching strategies, how much they've grown in the way they work together, and how much, I guess, collegial effort is put in amongst the groups. And those things don't just happen. Those kind of pushes and those kind of expectations in an organization happen from good leadership and a good organization. And at that level, that thing is driven by Mr. Newendorf. So thank you for your hard work with that, Mr. Newendorf, and the good job that you and your crew do. That was amazing to watch. Cool.
Great, thanks, Mike. Other board member reports?
I'll just piggyback on that as well, because I was able to attend. I just want to also say, in addition to all the cool classrooms and things that we got to see you do, we had a meeting with the superintendent and her Department of Education staff, and I loved how our student representatives talked about the culture of the school and talked about how they didn't feel like there was a single staff member that they couldn't share information with or go to, and just they felt very supported in the school. So I thought that was a really nice thing to hear from the students as well. And they just did a really nice job of showing how much and how passionate they are about being Lander Tigers. So I thought that was pretty neat.
Great, thanks, Taylor. Others? Mark?
Board members, Mr. Chair, I just wanted to share I attended a curriculum committee meeting the other week and was really impressed with the work that Mrs. Meyer and all of our staff are doing to choose curriculum and give my full support for the choices they're making about textbooks and other learning materials.
Thanks, Mark. Anyone else? Going once, going twice. So, all right, our student board rep unfortunately could not be here this evening, Dagan, so we'll move on, unfortunately, without her report, which is always sort of fun to hear. So Mike, superintendent's report.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I I just, for my report today, wanted to revisit some pieces of legislation that were brought up in this report last month. As you know, the legislative session wound down, first week of March. I think they ended on the 6th of March. And since that time, some of the bills I talked about were passed and became law, some were, not able to get across the finish line. But I wanted to touch base with you all on those particular bills. One that we talked about was House Bill 172, and that was the bill to repeal the gun-free zones, and it's called Repeal Gun-Free Zones and Preemption Amendments. This bill allows citizens to carry concealed in schools, just members of the public, without any further training or anything like that. So that bill became law without the governor's signature, and it would go into effect on July 1st. So what the bill says is that schools who have a policy like our district's policy CKA, we would still be able to require school staff who wish to carry and have some certain training and things like that before they're approved to carry. But there are a lot of other unanswered questions that we're waiting to get some information and clarification on, like what does that mean in terms of detection, restrictions on different types of parts of the building or different events, or there's been some question about what are the rights of staff now, if members of the public can now carry, why are we restricting the rights of staff members? So there's just a lot of questions that have come about, you know, as is the case with a lot of different legislation when it passes. We're waiting more clarification from our legal counsel and from Wyoming School Board Association on that. Another item that I touched base on, another bill last month, was the Steamboat Legacy Scholarship Act. That was House Bill 199, and that basically expanded the Education Savings Account program in Wyoming. It was signed by Governor Gordon. It's in effect for the 25-26 school year and beyond. So this is the one you may have read about that gives $7,000 per child to certain Wyoming residents who choose to not have their children attend public schools. The legislature allocated $30 million for this, so that should cover quite a few students if their families choose to participate. That's just one we're keeping an eye on because we're not really sure what that will do to our enrollment here and around the state in terms of public school enrollment. The third one I wanted to touch base on was House Bill 200. That was parent rights amendments, and that one kind of expanded on the statute that was the basis for our district's policy, KBB, that was passed last summer. That bill actually died in committee, so that one did not get across the finish line for this year, so we do not have to change our KBB policy at this point. House Joint Resolution 3 was support for rural schools. This was one of those rare bills that is near unanimous. It was 60 votes in favor and only two excused or abstained. No votes in opposition to it. It basically is just highlighting the importance of rural schools in Wyoming. I feel like in this district, we're kind of ahead of that with our concern for Denver City School and having some meetings out there to emphasize the need to provide a high quality education for everybody in Wyoming, even if they live far from some of our other larger towns. The last one that I mentioned last month that I wanted to just also mention this time around was Senate File 72, which was the Summer Vacation Preservation Act. It would have reduced student contact days from 175 to 165 at a minimum, and would have required school to start after Labor Day and end before Memorial Day. So kind of universalizing, if that's a word, school calendars around the state. That one failed in the House on third reading actually by a pretty significant margin. There were 5 votes in favor and 52 against and 5 excused. So we get to keep our school calendar, and districts around the state will still have the ability to, through their boards, to create school calendars that work for their communities and their schools. So that's all I have on those pieces. There were lots of other bills that were signed, but those were the ones that I was most keyed in on for this session. I guess if there are any questions, I'll do my best to try to answer those.
Any questions for Superintendent Harrison? Okay, I'm sure we'll hear more particularly about House Bill 172 as the WSB goes into regarding that. Great. Anything else, Commissioners?
Mr. Chair, that was it.
Okay, great. We'll move on to State Science Fair on word winners.
All right, Mr. Chair, so Pathfinder High School had a couple of teams competing in this year's State Science Fair at the senior level. The sponsor for that effort was PHS was Sam Hartpence. Mr. Hartpence teaches math and computer
you've got a presentation, right?
Yes.
You do, okay.
Yep. If I can share my screen.
You should be. So, we have most of our state science fair participants. Mr. Metz, Brandon Metz, was not able to join us today. He had a family emergency, so I'll kind of give a couple of highlights about his project. And does that by any chance also have the link for the video, or is that one of those PDFs?
These are PDFs.
Okay. Mike will have to share you guys the link. Because the video is pretty fantastic. So I'll start us off. So why Science Fair matters and why I've kind of championed this amongst my school. It engages kids in curiosity. They try to solve real world problems. These guys had a lot of interviews with academically minded people. Brandon, I believe, during the State Science Fair judging competition, he had 16 interviews. At one point, he has 6 judges interviewing him at once. I don't know that these guys quite had 6 at a time, but you had 3 at a time. And you probably had 12 or 15 interviews as well. So people who are experts in their field, interviewing them, they're experts in the field that they're judging them for. So these guys have answered really hard questions. Sometimes not being able to answer hard questions gracefully was also another skill that they had. We had a regional competition in Riverton and then went on to state. So you can go to the next slide there. This is just kind of the freeze frame of the video. Again, I highly encourage you guys to take a peek at that. It's pretty fantastic. So for years and years and years, the option has been available to team with Wyoming Space Grant Consortium on a science fair project. Nobody has ever taken advantage of that until this year. So we initially started out with 3 projects that were based on high altitude balloon measurements and atmospheric research. And you go ahead. So this is the team that you guys see here, Caden, Hunter, and Emmett. They were 3rd overall in a very competitive engineering division. There were 10 projects in that division. The entire stadium kind of started laughing because their project was universally appealed to a lot of special prizes. So they kept on getting up and going back and then coming back to their seats, and then they'd have to turn around, and yeah, they kind of did a dance. So some of their special awards and recognitions, they got a National Science Foundation Physics and Engineering Award, National Science Foundation Junior Innovator Award. They got an Air Force Award, the Wyoming Space Grant Consortium Award, and the Yale Science and Engineering Association Award. They still don't know what all of those awards mean. Checks may be in the mail. Sometimes they are opportunities, like a few years ago at the Science Fair, we had some students who got an internship with an ecological data science firm. So I met with those kids over the summer every week for a month and a half, kind of learning R-squared and some data science stuff. These guys may have something like that, or maybe they just have money. I'm sure they won't mind either way. Do you guys want to chat about what your project was? Oh, we can wait to the quad chart. So you can go to the next one. And this was Brandon Metz Award. He was 3rd place, again, in a very competitive division. I think there were 10 in both of these guys' divisions. And he got a lot of special recognitions as well. The NSF Geoscience Award, NOAA taking Pulse of the Planet Award, Wyoming Space Grant Consortium Award, Powder River Basin Award, and Council in Youth Conservation Award. So yeah, the next one I'll let these guys talk about their project. Is that one yours? Yeah, he wants to talk. And you can hand it out, Hunter.
sent it up on a weather balloon to see if we could slow the horses coming at the boxes so that there would be less force or more accurate data that you could get from the payloads. There were I know there's some devices out there that do collect, what was it again?
So the main data that they were collecting is just accelerations. And their idea, in your project evolved, what was your first project idea?
It was going to be a solar tracker.
Yeah, so it's similar, they were gonna create a platform that would just always point at the sun. Then they realized that while that is important, in fact, CWC is even, they're doing some project, they're sending weather balloons up during solar eclipses to try to see if there's a measurable difference in gamma radiation when the solar eclipse is actually happening. And some of their instruments need to be pointed at the sun. So when CWC at the regional science fair saw this, they actually approached these guys, and nothing has come of it yet, but they initially said that we got some budget for some people if they want to work on our project as well. So that was just another cool opportunity that came up in this project. And so like when they're measuring radiation, they have two things. One thing that just has to focus on the sun, and then like a Geiger counter can't be vibrated because it's got these little mercury tubes. So the weather balloon flights are pretty violent. And so this can kind of dampen some of those accelerations. That was kind of their goal.
Who wants to talk about challenges?
How did you fail?
Oh, well, that we failed a lot. So we ditched the solar tracker, and our first code that we used for the gimbal kept freezing, so we had to have another bit of code that would make sure it wouldn't freeze. But it took so long to boot up that we have a bit of missed data at the beginning because we had to start it so long before the launch that there was so much data that we might have a bit of misinformation.
Yeah. And just the flight itself went from really delightful conditions to really cold conditions. They had some problems.
Yeah, our thing froze. we weren't able to fix because it was the launch day.
Yeah. So there were some ways they failed. Did it work ish?
We believe it worked because on our graph, the blue line is the. Hold on, let me get it. I'll pass it around the board so that we see what it is. But it's a Raspberry Pi that tracks movement, and so it tracked the movement. And the one in the box was a lot more unstable than the one that we had on the platform, which had it more stable. And this yellow line measures altitude. And you can see right when the balloon popped, the blue one started to go crazy a lot more than the red one, because we're pretty sure that it might have hit something around here, but we're not quite sure.
And anything else?
Mr. Harper took all the
Yeah, that's another thing they did, talk about documentation. They wrote very sizable reports as well, so, yeah. And these guys liked coding so much, they had to code 3 microcontrollers for their project to work, to collect the data that they collect. And then Brandon's is the next one. I can speak a little bit to him and his motivation. Brandon measured atmospheric particulates, but he kind of developed a novel and unique way of doing so. As of right now, if you measure atmospheric particulates, what they do is galvanometric. If he was here, he would tell you the real word. He was telling me what it is. And he was explaining it to me. Basically, you get filters with different size sieves, and you pull air through those filters. You weigh the filters before, you weigh the filters after, and the increase in weight is the amount of particulates that you collected, and then you can do some like air mass calculations, and you can figure out kind of a uniform concentration that's found through the entire atmosphere. Brandon took real-time data as a function of altitude, and his goal was to attempt to see if there's any stratification of particulates in the atmosphere, and he was really inspired by the forest fires. So his hope is we would have been able to fly this payload while the fires were still active. He might be the only person who was kind of reluctantly upset that the forest fires were out as quickly as they were. He wouldn't admit that, but yeah, there was a little bit of a missed opportunity in terms of that, because the day we did fly, it was a beautiful, just clean, pristine day. Cold, but pristine day. But he still was able to kind of correlate some of the spikes in particulate data with like different cloud formations, and there were just like some wispy clouds. So he was looking at like the video footage and the altitude of the video footage when it was going through clouds, and you could see that on his data. And he also had applications to like fate and transport modeling for like a coal-fired power plant, that kind of stuff. So you can really figure out where coal ash is going and that kind of stuff. So this is his project. And was that the last slide? Oh, no, okay. Yeah, so we just have some thank yous. Miss Wall, our fearless leader back there, and Mr. Harris, Philip Bergmeyer, he's the Wyoming Space Grant Consortium fella. Bill Finney is the Regional Science Fair Director. Aaron Stokes is the State Science Fair Director. The school board, thank you for your support. And on a little bit more of a personal note, I've taught at an international boarding school. I've taught at Wyoming Indian, and I've taught here. Those are the 3 experiences I've had teaching. And we have some parents here, and this was the first time in all of my years of experience that I've had parents come to school to help the kids with their final project, because if you think freshman boys can create a board that pretty, mistaken. So yeah, we have 3 parents who are really, really helpful and supportive, and got these kids working well. So yeah.
I think you forgot on the thank you list, Mr. Harpence.
Oh,
I think we should, we're all on the debt of gratitude for what you're doing with these kids. This is pretty incredible.
yeah, and I mean, it's, a few years ago, my first year doing science fair, I think the school district sent 40 kids to the regional science fair, or 40, it might even be 40 projects. And every year it's actually kind of decreased. And so it's turning into a little bit of a personal mission of mine to kind of build that back up, not only amongst our own district, but I'm recruiting neighbor teachers to the Society of Science Advocates to try to get them to build up their own programs. So I have 2 teachers in Riverton that I'm going to be working with a little bit, and a teacher at Wind River that I'm going to be working with a little bit, so that we can spread our expertise around. I do have a narrow field of things that I can help kids with. We have a couple of school board members that we might start recruiting for some GIS projects and such. We did have one student who started a project on zebra mussels. Didn't get past the research plan, and that's kind of another aspect of this is there was a lot of quality work that didn't make it to the finish line, because it's hard. It's really hard to get this done. You guys put in a lot of hours after school. So yeah, super proud of these guys.
Oh, we didn't mention your engineering strap, Emmett. Emmett made this so that our weather balloon, so that it could actually be attached to the weather balloon. Because with the normal straps, it would get in the way of the actual gimbal.
So it's not just you guys that had a problem with freezing. I think about a few years ago, all of the windmills down in Texas froze in a big, ice storm. So you're in good company. You didn't knock down the power grid, so you're free.
Yeah, no, that wasn't even something that they thought of because the anticipated balloon launch was gonna be a pretty warm day initially, and the second backup day, it looked like it was gonna be a pretty warm day. Granted, when it gets to 91,000 feet, so 91,000 feet is how high it got, and the footage, you can see the curvature here. But yeah, it's really cold, really up high.
And we're pretty sure it works because the sun just hit it perfect.
Yeah.
What programming languages did you write code in?
I'm pretty sure we use JavaScript.
Java.
Oh,
Java.
we used that.
We use the development environment.
Rick?
Boys, I have a question for you. This is awesome and it's so cool to see, so thanks for showing. I was just curious if you guys had to do this again, what would you do differently with your project or your launch?
Change out the grease with servos to something that you know for a fact is ready for extremely low temperatures. Make sure the battery pack didn't freeze on us by putting it into a walk-in freezer for I'd say 30 minutes. Check back, see if it's working, and if it is, then it should be able to withstand the temps.
They had several days where they were like throwing the box to each other, bench testing it, but they didn't do that in a freezer.
Wait, we didn't mention the yaw problem either. We had a problem, so it was supposed to go 360 degrees, but the servos can't do that forever. I think it's the wires and the bolts, but Emmett thinks it's just the servo.
Servos can only rotate, servos that we use can only rotate 360 degrees.
Yeah.
So our yaw next year, I would hope to be able to use a brushless motor.
And a slip ring.
Yeah, so they would have to engineer a slip ring to be able to talk to everything and still maintain like electrical connectivity, so like wires that can spin, basically it's a socket. And then they would be able to solve the yaw problem, which is actually the biggest and probably most important of all the problems.
Yeah, that was.
But they have an idea about how to do it, so they could potentially do an extension next year if they wanted to.
Mr. Harpence, do you have the funding you need for this?
Miss Wall doesn't say no. Maybe I should volunteer that information. It's a curious question. I have been getting paid the last couple of years through the Society for Science Advocates. I've been getting a stipend to do the science fair. Next year is my last year of eligibility for that grant program. So my own time has been reimbursed by the Society for Science Advocates. And I know Ms. Prine used to be able to do a lot of the science fair stuff within the school. In terms of materials, we also got a grant from the Wyoming Energy Authority that purchased a lot of the hardware that everybody needed.
And they had druzzers, so we weren't able to put them on our board and things.
Yeah, so there's a couple of things that these guys learned a lot about bias because the Wyoming Energy Authority has an award. They received the Wyoming Energy Authority grant, so they were not eligible for that award. Wyoming Space Grant Consortium, they did give them a fourth prize. I think if they didn't do a Wyoming Space Grant Consortium balloon launch, they probably would have gotten a higher prize there. Like I think the judges were, well, we gotta give them something, but let's give them all the lowest prize we got, kind of thing, to try to limit that kind of appearance of bias. So yeah, there were some of those comments we had to chat about when the judging came in, and when these guys could say what awards they were eligible for.
Well, I asked that question because this is super important stuff, I think. It's super cool stuff. And if that ever becomes an issue, I would encourage you to talk to the board about it, or at least We'll talk to Mr. Harris about it, because we need to keep this going.
Yeah, and ideally, I would start recruiting people at OBHS and I'd be working with LMS as well. Like, I don't know how much I can take on for all of them. I do have a few high school students at LBHS that have already approached me for projects next year. And I can take on more. I don't know about the logistics of taking on all of the schools for science fair. No, I do know, I can't do that. I'll be on my limit for sure. So yeah, that's really my personal goal right now, is to try to find some more mentors.
Other questions? All right, nice job, gentlemen, thank you. Mike, you can tell we're doing pretty good on your assignments. All right, so we can move into action. I need to get a motion to approve personnel actions as presented.
So moved.
Discussion? Mr. Harris, did you have anything you wanted to add, since this is kind of the biggie?
Sure, so I guess the only thing I would add is, we have some resignations on this list. We've got 6, we've had 4 appointments and 7 transfers. One thing I wanted to point out that the board will hopefully be pleased to hear is that we're seeing higher numbers of applicants this year for our vacant positions. Morgan attended the UW job fair last week. We were hoping to find a strong science candidate, but there was 1 candidate for all the school districts that were attending. There was 1 UW graduate that was going to be certified to teach science. He couldn't keep up with all the demand. I guess, again, people chasing him around the exhibit hall, but we weren't able to land that candidate, but we did have some good candidates in other areas where we're seeking candidates. So, yeah, I think we're gonna be okay. We have a couple that are tighter than others, but overall the hiring seems like it's not as bad as it may have been anticipated to be.
And as far as the resignations that we've seen this year, how do those, I know you didn't prepare for this, but so I'm just wondering, relative to how we've seen in the past, are we about on par, on course with where we normally are?
Mr. Chair, I don't think we're that far off from a normal year. If I'm looking at the leave exception request, or the early resignation notification process that we had, that number was comparable to previous years. We didn't like set a new high in that area or anything like that. So yeah, there's some movement. I'm kind of surprised this year by the transfers. It seems like that might be a little bit different than most years. We have a lot of inter-building and intra-building transfer going on, but I don't think the overall numbers of people exiting the district is outside of normal.
Okay. Any other questions or discussion before we vote?
Are we voting on it as one page deal?
Yeah. Yeah, unless you want to write it down.
That's fine.
All right, all those in favor? All right. Any opposed? Motion carries. I need to get a motion to approve the stipulated agreement or agreements presented. Second. Discussion? All those in favor? Aye. Opposed? Okay, so, Mr. Harris, motion passed.
Mr. Chair, I realize I should have mentioned this earlier, but I wonder if it would be worth coming back to this after our discussion, since we're discussing stipulated agreements later in the meeting.
Sure, I mean, we can revisit this if we want to. Just, help me remember.
Okay.
Okay. All right, so let's take, before we move into discussion items, let's go ahead and take a 5-minute break. And then we'll come back for questions that we need to go over with first reading. Whole section. All right, so let's go ahead and start with the pair of GBDA and GBDA. One of these is actually being deleted, so GBDA would be deleted. And effective effectively replaced with, if I'm right, Mike, GB, both of them deal with staffing. So, Mike, do you wanna take us through
Sure.
those?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So yes, the first, I'll go through the policy that was proposed for deletion. First of all, it's 36 years old. Some of the provisions I'm not even sure are legal. And there's some things in here that we don't even do. We don't have every employee as a condition of employment do a physical examination. So that seemed like that was right for deletion. Then I started reading through here and, a doctor's release to return from maternity leave, we don't do that. There's a lot of things where this may have been current practice in 1989, but it didn't match up with our current way of doing business as a school, and with the changing legal landscape from decades ago. So, instead of trying to revise that whole policy, I took what the WSBA suggested in this area, which is GBGA, and you can see it kind of expands on some of that stuff that's included in the previous policy. We do have physical examinations for bus drivers, all of them. Certain positions may require physical examination. I don't think it's very many of them, but certainly bus drivers, if there's some other position that requires physical, lifting ability or the ability to get into tight spaces or something like that, we would probably require that. This 30-day grace period is also something that was not in the original policy. If there's some reason why the person could not get that done before beginning their duties. The special examinations part, I think, is a little bit more cognizant of the reality of the current landscape. We don't have a lot of people, in my experience, I can't think of any employee that's ever had to have a special examination of their physical or mental health. But that is in the policy that was suggested by WSBA as a model. Communicable diseases we cover in another area, but since that was part of the WSBA draft, I also brought that in there as well. A lot of it is suggestion. That second paragraph under communicable diseases is not really, there's no real meat to it, because a lot of that is private, it's hidden protected information. We can't obviously require that, like asking people, what is your health status? It's not really what we can do under HIPAA, so. We want to treat people with fairness, confidentiality, of course, and we're going to follow the law. If there's a reason to make accommodations, we will do that, so that kind of reiterates some of those other requirements that you find in other statutes and other policies as well. And then confidentiality, again, is hammered in this one, just because they're really sensitive things, people's physical health, their mental health, their status in terms of any diseases or health conditions is very, very sensitive, and we want to represent that in the policy as well, so. Those are the major changes from the original, and it'll be something from the 21st century instead of the May 20th.
Easy. One quick question, the communicable diseases, does what the WSBA provides, does that mirror what we currently have, or are we starting complementary?
This, Mr. Chair, this policy is almost a verbatim quote from the WSBA model. It's even the same code.
Okay.
Yeah, so those are, I think the only word that I changed from the WA draft was all bus drivers. I think it just said bus drivers. I think the Department of Transportation requires all bus drivers to have a physical.
I wonder if it would be worth, so we don't just copy things, if we just point to the other policy section, so we don't have to maintain it in one place.
Mr. Chair, so we could do that. I think the communicable diseases, it comes up in a couple of different places. It comes up in staff, and I think it comes up in student also, so we'd be referring to some J series policy and some G series.
Okay.
It starts to complicate things, so we could do that. I'm certainly open to it. That's the thinking for not linking in all those other references.
That's fine, it's just the computer science guy, we want to reuse code. Any other discussion on this one? Okay, thanks, Mike. So the next one is policy GBK and policy GDK. GDK is just like the last ones would be deleted and replaced with GBK. These have to deal with tobacco-free schools versus nicotine-free schools, which it turns out now is significantly different. So, Mike, go ahead.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chair. So yeah, first of all, these two policies were almost identical. And I don't know why that wasn't caught in our policy audit earlier with WSBA, but I think there's just one line of difference between the two. There's a point number 8, I think, on GBK that doesn't exist on GDK. Everything else is the same. So GDK, I was just proposing that we would abandon that one and make GDK the standing tobacco or nicotine-free schools policy. So only thing that really changed on the draft, the revision here, is to change the word tobacco to nicotine, and including the word pouch there and the other types of tobacco, previously tobacco products, cigar, cigarette, snuff, dip, chew, pouch, added that because that does seem to be, for tobacco-free nicotine, that seems to be the way that that's delivered these days, is through those oral pouches. Yeah, and then so there's just some companies that produce these products under number 7 instead of tobacco companies. It could be tobacco or it could be Zyn or whoever who's not gonna advertise or support that through sponsorship or other types of promotion. That's it.
I know almost nothing about these products. Are there similar products that are nicotine-free?
Mr. Chair, I'm not much of a customer in this area, but there are some that are just for flavor. Yeah, they're mostly marketed as like cessation products.
So do we, I guess what I'm getting at is if a student showed up with one of those products, do we care that they can chew gum and depending on which school, I think, right? So if they can chew nicotine-free gum, I assume that we're okay with those kinds of products as well.
Mr. Chair, I don't think we have a problem with that. There's a lot of different ways you can ingest nicotine, and if they're not ingesting nicotine, then I don't think that, whether it's gum or another type of pouch, I don't think we'd have any sort of problem with that.
I just wanted to double check where the line is drawn on this. Okay.
Quick question. We have sensors in our bathrooms, is that correct? So when we have public events, do those sensors ever go off? And if they do, how do we deal with that?
Mr. Chair, Ms. Harms, I would have to defer to some of the principals. I know we have gauge sensors in those locker rooms, or in those bathrooms that are used by the public at events. As to how we handle those alerts that go on during public events, I would have to defer to either Mr. Morton or Mr. Gordon, Mr. Miller on that.
Mr. Chair, I don't know if we've had that happen yet, to be honest with you. So the way it works is the sensor goes off, sends an email to us, it's even connected to our phone. So I don't think we've ever had that happen, but if we did, if we were there, we would probably, walk towards the bathroom and kind of see what's going on. If it were a student, it would be a different interaction, or a parent. Current policy, I don't know if there's much we would have said other than, hey, it's probably not the best place to do that, right? But it hasn't happened a lot for us, if at all. But if it did, we would approach it, I guess, if there were a policy a bit differently, being nicotine instead of tobacco. Never had a cigarette in the building. Just about.
Thank you. I'm guessing that it would probably be more at the field house. That would be, do we have it posted that we have sensors and it's prohibited use? I'm just wondering if that would maybe be a proactive way to approach it.
Mr. Chair, Ms. Harms, I'm not exactly sure about the signage. If it is there, I've just tuned it out, as a non-user, so I don't know if there are any tobacco-free campus signs at this point.
Mr. Chair, members of the board, there definitely are on the outside of all of our building at the field house area. At the most recent tournament, I had a couple parents that were literally smoking right there by those where the shrubs used to be, the old box that's right by the front doors. So I had to approach them, literally it was like lunchtime, so all our students are there, and they're old-fashioned cigarettes, which I haven't seen for a while, so I kind of had to applaud that, but, so that's what it is. I haven't dealt with the adult thing in the vapes in the bathrooms as much. We do get censored, we've investigated it. We've had a couple tournaments where it's been other teams, participants kind of thing, and then we just turn it over to their coach and their respective situation. That's how we handle that. To be honest, I don't think most adults are sneaking a toke in the bathroom because they don't have to go to the bathroom to do that, and that's the only place the sensors are live.
Thank you.
Mr. Chair, can you modify this policy to add token there?
Mrs. Walker.
Mr. Chairman, members of the board, we did have a parent vaping at a family night event. And so I just asked them not to vape in the building, and if they needed to kindly leave the building, and they were kind of, oh, okay. And, just kind of handled it that way, so they will vape inside the buildings.
A lot different than the eighties when the teacher's lounge was, about as thick as smoke as you could get. Holy cow. All right, any other discussion on this policy? All right, so we'll move on to discussion of part B. The only thing that we wanted to mention tonight is that we were supposed to be speaking about this tonight, but because of some of the machinations that happened down in Cheyenne regarding school funding issues, it was all late breaking, so we didn't get a chance as a committee to meet with that. So we're gonna push it off to the next meeting. Just because we mentioned it was gonna happen, I didn't want to completely leave it off the agenda. So we'll discuss more in April.
The salary committee did meet with the staff. We were able to do that, but it was just last week, and so that's why we requested to have it moved to next.
Gotcha.
So anything to look at and go over what our options are and stuff. So we'll have that for everyone in April.
Great, thank you guys. That's a heavy lift, we appreciate you guys doing that. Okay, so the WHSAA name, image, and likeness policy, I wanted to bring this up. WSBA, well, let me back up. WHSAA is putting together a policy and asked WSBA to send it out to all of the school boards to gather some feedback about this NIL policy. I got ahold of Brian Farmer just to ask him a couple questions about this. I was confused as to where this came from. Apparently, just because it wasn't in the background, apparently one of the districts, one of the star athletes was approached by a business to use their image, their likeness in all of their advertising to be paid for that. The business, we've got to give the business props. They said, look, we're not going to do anything until we know that it's approved by the WHSAA. So they went to WHSAA and they said, we don't have a policy, so we're going to have to put one together real quick. And that's what's driving this entire situation. I did ask Brian if they don't do a policy, what's the status quo? And basically he said if there is no policy, if they don't have a policy, then it's sort of anything goes. So they really do need to put something together in terms of the NIL. I did ask him about this policy and if you could make it more strict than this, because this seems like a pretty darn strict policy as far as I read it. He said he thought this was probably as far as you could go that would withstand legal scrutiny. This still would allow, for example, a student to go in plain clothes, go to a photo shoot with the company photo shoots in plain clothes. He says, hey, I'm number 10 on the Tigers, and I want you to go to this car wash. There's nothing much you can do about that in terms of legality. I mean, it's a freedom of speech type thing, all those types of issues. What this does is restrict any kind of use of school likeness. So you can't be in your jersey. You can't use any films that happen either during a live game or during practices. There's several different things in here that we can discuss, but that's what this tries to do is anything that's involvement with the actual school, that's all it is. So, that's a little primer for this, and if we want to discuss it, we can. We don't have to respond to it at all if we don't want to. I just wanted to give everyone the option.
So Mr. Chair, I guess my question was, I thought maybe the black was a policy that they already had and then the red was addition, but you're saying they've never had this policy at all? So what's the difference between, do we know the difference between like the black and the red?
I think the red, if I understand this right, when you look at the black, it doesn't actually deal with NIL.
Okay, so that part is their stuff, and then the red is just been that, okay, got
It
it.
seems like the black just defines the amateur standards.
Yes, okay.
Just our participation as an amateur.
All the red is this new part that they're adding.
Right. Personally, I'm fine with the policy that they put together. I think it's good. I wouldn't want to inject this kind of pressure to kids that are in high school. I'm not sure I'm that thrilled with it in college, to be honest. So, I'm fine with it, but I don't want to speak for anyone else.
I agree. I think the idea of having athletes paid for their image, especially kids, is crazy, but, so, I mean, I'm fine with this as well, if that's, they just wanted our feedback. Don't have much to add, other than,
Yeah, support and trust their judgment on this one.
Any other, guys, anyone have any disagreements if I can go ahead and write them back and say, yeah, SCSD #1 is okay with policy written? Mike, you agree with that?
I think it's a scary thing that we have to even do it.
Yeah, me too. You know, at first, when I first got it, I thought, what are they trying to do here? I don't want to get NIL into all this, and then once I talked to Brian, I said, ooh, now I understand.
It seems like they indicated that it's pretty common in a lot of other states.
Yeah.
Well, they hunt sports schools, they hunt coaches, they hunt different things so they can get seen, and if it gets to that point, it'll just destroy high school athletics. And just everything will be no sport.
Well, when you get some pro organizations that recruit right out of high school, right, that's a big deal. Okay, let's not belabor the point, I'll let them know. Transparency board meeting and recordings, we tabled that last meeting, talked about it a little bit more in this meeting, to gather some more information, so Mike, if you wanted to leave this one off a little bit.
Sure, yeah, like you mentioned, Mr. Chair, this is just moved from the February meeting. We wanted a little more time to consider this, or actually, it was a time consideration, actually, from the last February meeting, because it was a long meeting, so we decided to give it a little more prominence in the March meeting. I don't really have anything more to share that I didn't share last time. I'm willing to do the recording and storage. The only concern, as I shared, was what Scott Kolpicki brought up in terms of accessibility, but I don't think that's a huge barrier. We see a lot of other public boards putting things up that don't include sign language interpreters, all sorts of other accommodations like you mentioned in my own college. So I'm whatever the board's pleasure is, we will do it.
So would all of the meeting recordings be available in perpetuity? Is that part of the obligation?
Mr. Chair, Ms. Brew, I believe that would be the case as long as YouTube exists. It would just be maintained on YouTube.
I think legally is it 7 years that they need to be out?
Mr. Chair, yes, so they're, like, as a public record, it's, I think, 7 years at least, yeah.
So that's the big difference here, right? As soon as we do this, it actually becomes an official public record, which is different than how we handle the videos now. So it does have to comply with, at the very least, the law that it's accessible for a minimum of 7 years. We need to recall that. I don't think it needs to be kept on-prem. And I think as long as we upload to YouTube, we're probably okay. As long as we don't lose access to our YouTube channel. I mean, it would probably be good to try to, I look at Chris, it would probably be good if we hung on to at least a copy of those in case for whatever reason we did get hacked and lost access to our YouTube channel. Is that fair?
We do already, Mr. Chair.
Okay, alright, great, thanks, Chris.
Mr. Chair, is this something that we need to create a policy on, or is this something that we can
Mike, you know, Carol, is that in policy, do you know? The, like, current records keeping, or?
I'm not.
Sorry, I didn't mean to put you on the spot.
Mr. Chair, if I could.
Yeah.
I think we would probably wanna add a policy under section B, which has to do with board governance and operations. If we decide that, if the board decides this is what they wanna do, we would probably put it in policy
Sounds like everyone on the board's okay with it. Does anyone have concerns?
What's it gonna cost us?
Shouldn't cost us anything beyond a little storage, right?
Yeah, Mr. Chair, right now, if we keep the setup we have, it wouldn't cost anything. I'd like to make this a little more professional over time, but,
Okay.
you know, this could be our baseline.
Okay, so, Mr. Harris, if you would go ahead and, for next meeting, have a first reading, sunrise policy that would include this.
Absolutely, Mr. Chair, as I just looked in the board docs, we have a policy BEDJ on broadcasting and taping of meetings, so I think it's probably just some amendment to that existing policy to talk about online storage and that.
Okay. Great, thank you. Anything else on video recordings? Okay. Hearing none. We had a request to go over some standard-based learning and grading expectations. I noticed that we had some public contact here that goes over our current, expectations for teachers and students at each school. Do we have a presentation that we wanna do with this?
Mr. Chair, no, not exactly, not a formal presentation. These are just, some agreements that the admin team came to with regard to practices around standards-based learning and grading. We wanted you all to see that, and we field questions from constituents from time to time about different aspects of standards-based learning and grading. So that's the idea with this document, is to put some of those core non-negotiable expectations on a one-page document that can be shared not only with the board, but with our staff, parents, other interested members of the community on how this exactly works. The second page there is just a glossary of assessment terms, because it's different types of assessment are appropriate to certain types of situations, and they're not all equivalent, so we wanted to include that, because assessment is referred to on the first page quite a bit.
Okay. Questions and comments about this topic?
I have a handful of questions, Mr. Chair, Mr. Superintendent. And I don't know if these are also questions for administrators. I guess my first question is, have we asked for and received faculty and staff feedback on these grading processes? Do we know if they work for our teaching staff? And if we give a teaching staff the opportunity on a regular basis to give input?
Sure.
Mr. Chair, I think, yes, Ms. Gantz, to respond to that question, yeah, I think that the standards-based learning and grading process has been sort of a development over the past 8 years or so. Once the decision was made in concert with the board and administrative team at that time to implement this, it takes some time to develop it and get it where you want it to be, make it robust enough. So while we haven't given feedback for teachers and staff to comment about how to implement or to suggest changes like every year, part of that is because it takes so many years to get this right and to do it consistently across the district. And so I guess there are a handful of principals here as well, from all the different schools, all the principals here except for Ms. Foxland. She's online if she wanted to comment as well, but they can speak to that, the feeling around staff, implementation of these expectations and just the overall, expectations.
Mr. Mentor.
Yeah, Mr. Chair, members of the board, I think that's a great question, and I think the whole thing started actually with all of the input and feedback from our teachers. So at LVHS specifically, there was several teachers who jumped on board immediately to start a pilot. They tried a lot of different things, told us what was working, what wasn't working, what we should consider, what we shouldn't consider, all of those kind of things. And so over the 8 years, as Mr. Harris talks about, we continually refine those things. Up to when we formed that agreement, this is in front of you actually, I believe all of our administrators met with their guiding coalition, so the department chairs and the leadership teams of their building, to gather the actual information that's provided on that sheet to make sure that we're all on the same playing field and page and consistent across buildings, even though there's differences between how it's handled at an elementary or middle school versus the high school. The big pieces are consistent across all of the buildings. So I think that input is constant and ongoing. Just to share with you, there's another conversation, a lot of the kind of sticky parts are how this works inside of a active and live grade book called Infinite Campus. And the computer programmer in the room will understand that sometimes you just can't get it to do what you want it to do. And we're not computer programmers. And so we've had to work really closely with Chris Jones, our Infinite Campus guy, Infinite Campus itself, and doing those kind of things. And so we've had like recently ongoing meetings just yesterday with Chris Jones about some tweaks and some improvements. And so all of us are locked into a continuous improvement cycle, and so we're constantly gathering feedback and input from teachers on how we can continue to improve this and enhance it and make it better for not only them, the students, and the parents that we're ultimately reporting back to.
Thanks, Mr. Newendorf. Mark?
I was gonna echo that, thank you, Mr. Newendorf. I have a follow-up question, which is, I don't like that, the micro, I can't look at you. You can't reach the microphone. My question was, I've been reading some about Power Law, and I think it is a wonderful idea to grade our students on growth and improvement. I think that's beautiful. And some questions I have are, does the Power Law grading system allow students to come in who are already really successful and still allow them to show growth if they're already meeting or exceeding standards when we first get them? And do we ever encounter scenarios where students will intentionally do poorly on a primary assignment in order to kind of trick the Power Law system into showing growth? Are two questions I had. Thank you.
Mr. Harris?
Sure, Mr. Chair, Ms. Gantz, I think that last line on the first page there, that last couple sentences, Power Law is just a predictive tool that takes into account growth and how recently the different piece of evidence was stored in there. It's intended to be used while teachers are providing instruction. So before you assign a final grade for that standard or for that course, it's telling you what the likely progression of that student's learning is going to, where it's going to likely end up. But it's not going to, we should not be using it as a way to replace the teacher's evaluation of all the evidence that they collect. And that has some reason, that's why, one of the reasons why we put those different types of assessment on the second page. A lot of what we're putting into the grade book are like the summative assessment scores. But that the formative assessments are not in there. Other things that you see in the classroom that are not summative assessments are also part of the teacher's calculus when they determine the final grade. So Power Law has been, I think partially because of the name, has been relied upon too heavily and given too much emphasis by some folks on staff and outside of staff in terms of like what the student's final grade is going to be, but it's not meant to give the student a final grade. It's just meant to be a reflective tool for the teacher to go, this student looks like they're on this type of trajectory while you're providing instruction. When you're done providing the instruction, you give that summative assessment, that grade goes, I mean, you have that summative assessment grade, but before you get the final grade, you gotta think about all the different pieces of data that you have.
I guess I'm just kind of piggyback off on Mara's question, because it is something that's brought up to us often as parents, confused about that and feeling like maybe every teacher handles that a little bit different. And so I'm just wondering if you administrators can comment about it with any new teachers, if there's some sort of like coaching that you do, or like inter-observer agreement where you maybe pull a grade that they graded as paper on and said, oh, this is interesting because I would have, graded this separately. So maybe that's something we could tell parents that is happening. That would be helpful for us to know, or things like that. I would appreciate some of that information.
Sure.
Mr. Chair, Mrs. Jacobs, yes. So I think a lot of that conversation happens within the collaborative team meeting at every grade level and content area. So they should be comparing their notes if they have another teacher who teaches the same content. How are you grading this? What pieces of evidence are you considering? If they don't have, if they're like a singleton, they can use their instructional facilitator, other members of the academic coalition to get that feedback along with the vertical meetings with their peers in different schools that teach the same or similar content. Yeah, there should be, and we don't want people, I mean, I can just say this flat, people should not just be relying on Power Law to give you a final grade. That's, honestly, that's not doing the student justice. So, Power Law is just meant to just give you a little indication of where things likely are heading, but it's based on a very limited set of data. and the teacher has all the data to assign the final score, not the computer.
Other discussion? Mr. Harris, one piece that I'd like to get some feedback on, it's been the one issue that seems to have been pervasive throughout the time I've been on the board, even before I was on the board, and that is probably the biggest concern, is about the accountability piece, kids' accountability with, particularly with turning in homework, waiting until the last minute, with, you know, with the, what we hear, whether it's right or not, what we hear is, kids will wait till the last minute and there are no ramifications for that. That seems over time to have morphed and changed, and I'd just be really curious to know now, what is the state of how accountability is handled in terms of turning in homework on time, attending class, those kinds of things.
Mr. Chair, I'm glad you asked about that, because, and Mr. Neuendorf talked about continuous improvement process, and that is embedded into this system. We're not gonna just sit back and keep things the same if we're not seeing the type of behavior, the type of results we need from students. And that was one area where I think previously that was a little bit of a weakness in our system. But I think in OBHS and LMS both, and correct me if I'm wrong, I think there are similar processes at the elementary school, they're not called the big four expectations, but at our secondary level, we have those behavioral expectations now, and there are some, I don't want to call them consequences, or things that happen if you do not meet those behavioral expectations that have to do with attending class on time, being on time, turning your work in, participating in the class activities. If you're not doing those things, you start to lose privileges. Although your final grade may not be affected by those behavioral elements, you start to lose privileges like off-campus lunch, participating in different events and activities and things like that. So that's the areas where we have some leverage to correct the behaviors, but still measure the students' learning per the standard in the final grade. So your grade may not suffer, but if you don't turn stuff in, you're not gonna have a grade, and you're gonna also have these other consequences for not doing your job as a student. And I guess I would ask principals if they have other comments on those to reiterate or add more detail to what I just stated.
Very quiet in the background. Don't see any hands, anything.
Well, I can vouch for that now. My kids are getting older. I mean, if you look at the newsletters from middle school and high school, it talks about those expectations, and if there's a certain amount of missing assignments, you know, you're not gonna be able to participate in X, Y, and Z, and so, and they have those laid out for students to see weekly in the newsletter. I'm sure there's discussions as well, so I do think that has morphed and changed over time from what we were initially told as far as expectations. I think there's more we can do on that part, and, you know, but it's a collaborative effort on that.
Okay, great. Mara?
Mr. Chair, Mr. Harris, I want to question, and I realize it's kind of an abstract question, but I'm curious how administrators in our grading policies balance both the need for standards and consistency amongst schools. I think that's really important, and also respect the autonomy of the individual teachers and fields. The way you grade in math may be very different than English, may be very different than an ag class, and yeah, I guess I'm curious how we're still protecting teachers' autonomy over their grading systems and methods.
Mr. Chair, Ms. Gans, that's a great question. And it is a little tough, and you can see some of that tension or that the differences from one content area to another in some of these responses on this expectations document. Like, teachers will administer assessments every 1 to 4 weeks based on content. Well, that's a big range. Is it weekly or is it monthly? And that has to do with a lot of the differences in the content, you know, whereas some classes may be able to clip through their standards more quickly. If you're studying a novel in ELA 4, for example, to assess something every week may not make sense when you're really trying to get the depth of that novel. So we tried to account for some of those differences in here. There are gonna be some differences in terms of age, in terms of content. We're trying to account for that while still having some common expectations and some consistency as much as we can, but what we want is we want kids to learn. We want kids to we wanna make sure they get multiple opportunities in every standard before they get an overall grade, and the particulars of how that plays out. A lot of it is left to the collaborative team in that content area at that grade level to determine, okay, how frequently are we gonna assess? What is our proficiency scale for this standard? Those instructional decisions are not intended to be made at the building, like from building leadership down to the teacher level, or from the superintendent certainly. That's for the collaborative team to dig into the standards, understand what's being asked of the students, and then evaluating the students' work to see if it meets the expectations of that standard, and then that team of educators as they interpret the standard. So I don't know if that answers your question, I hope, but yeah, we're not trying to take autonomy away from teachers, but we are trying to make a consistent experience for kids. You know, if you're in teacher A's class and teacher B teaches the same class, it should be a similar experience for students in both of those classes, even though it's a different teacher. And it should flow together also, that vertical articulation from elementary to middle and high school. That's a consideration as well. We have our teams meet vertically a couple times a year as well. So we're trying with that. That's a little tough though. I mean, it is one of the hardest parts of this, but it's something we're still learning to work out.
Mr. Hort?
Mr. Chair, members of the board, I would add in an era that's kind of like in this tornado of AI, I think that a lot of contents and disciplines are moving more and more towards performance-based assessments. Like you mentioned how different ag might be than in the LA summative assessment. It's getting harder and harder to trust anything from students that we don't see them do. So I think we're all kind of wrestling with assessment practices as we're going through that. LMS is pretty unique because we're 100% singleton. And so there's nobody else who taught 6th grade math today. There's nobody to really collaborate in that sense with. And so to that end, LMS teachers have a lot of autonomy in terms of how they're gathering that assessment data, but I'm sure that applies to the other schools. But AI has really made us think about how we're gathering assessment data, and it's really what we see students do is the most reliable piece of data that we can get out.
Thank you. Any other questions? Yes, Mike.
Mr. Chair, members of the board, I just wanted to add one more thing. Just because we have this document doesn't mean we're done with these expectations by any means. This is going to continue to evolve as we share this with different teams and with new teachers and things like that. We're going to continue to improve our expectations and making that clarity for what we expect in terms of student learning and how we're going to measure that. So don't expect that this is the one and done. We'll probably be back on this topic again very soon.
Great, thanks, Mike. All right, moving on, unless there's objection. Let's get to F, long-term suspension and expulsion. Mike, did you want to lead this one off?
I'm sure, thank you, Mr. Chair. So this was another topic that was tabled from February. We wanted more time to fully discuss this, but I think there are still some questions, maybe among board members, maybe from members of the public on the suspension and expulsion practices in the district, particularly with as they relate to stipulated agreements, which are basically agreements put in place when a student could be expelled for the conduct that's in question. But we put stipulations in place that allow them to return to school before an expulsion period would expire. Typically, an expulsion is one full 12-month calendar or calendar year, 12 months. We do not expel students for that length of time except for in really egregious situations that are extreme and rare. What typically happens, and if you look at the content that was shared in December, it's also copied in this month's agenda. Most of our stipulated agreements are due to drug and alcohol offenses, which are pretty serious because not only is it harmful to the student and illegal, but it's also a safety issue for the other students in the school, staff, other individuals who may be interacting with that student on the court or on the wrestling mat, wherever it happens to be. So we value sobriety among our students, and so what we're trying to do with a stipulated agreement is balance multiple priorities. And I apologize to the board for reiterating something that I said in an email this afternoon, but I see those priorities as kind of fourfold. We want to recognize the illegal nature of the behavior that resulted in the disciplinary action. We need to account for the behavior's impact on the health and safety of our school, in particular our students and our staff. We want to maintain, third, a positive supportive connection between the student and the school. And then fourth, but not least, we want to ensure the student's ability to maintain academic progress. So any response to an infraction of that nature, say a student has a has THC on them or is under the influence of marijuana at school. We could expel that student for 12 months, we don't do that. What we do instead is put some stipulations in place that will keep them on campus at an alternate placement program. It's the first offense for 20 days. And then during that term of 20 days, they're still keeping up in their academic content from their school, their home school, back at LBHS or LMS or Pathfinder, wherever that happens to be. We're also involving them with the school counselor. If they get project aware-based counseling, that continues. If they get special education services, those continue. We also get online and in-person support from that student's teachers and their principal, their guidance counselors often. We have a dedicated staff member, Mr. Show, who's the individual who runs he doesn't run it, but he supervises the alternate placement program. He's out there when we have students in the program. So they're not left at home. Previous practice was to tell kids, okay, you can log in from the library and do this online thing through BYU, and that was a disaster. What we want to do is keep kids connected, help them understand what happened with the behavioral choice that they made and why it was not the right choice, especially in a school setting, and then allow them to maintain their progress in the curriculum. And another part of that is some drug and alcohol counseling, that's a part of the program. So they do get a little bit of that. It's not treatment per se, but it is some acknowledgement that, hey, you need some information here. If you think it's cool to bring THC to school or to be high at school, you probably don't have the right understanding of what this is doing to your brain, and we can help you understand some of those factors a little bit, hopefully prevent a recurrence. So again, those priorities, that's what we're trying to balance. We don't want to take kids out and be overly punitive. At the same time, we recognize that it is a serious offense and has some safety implications for the campus. So I guess that's my general overview of the philosophy behind the stipulated agreement process. And again, I think it's over 95% now, probably 96 to 97% of our stipulated agreements are due to drug and alcohol types of infractions. So we're not talking about minor types of things like, chewing gum or, violating the dress code or whatever. These are some major infractions that if you do them in society, you're probably going to be facing a citation and some sort of police action. So the day-to-day routine stuff is not something that's going to get you sent to the alternate placement program, something pretty major.
Okay, discussion.
Mr. Chair.
Kevin.
So I think what I'm seeing on this is maybe our board has two different ideas about this, and I think there's confusion and it's becoming muddled, because I think what is maybe happening is that some board members are feeling like our handbook and our disciplinary procedures for certain violations are too harsh and they shouldn't be considered expulsions. And I think that's a separate conversation that maybe probably needs to happen in the summer and in line with our handbook. But I just want to reiterate that if we do not approve these as stipulated agreements for students, what we're essentially doing is just saying that they are expelled. And I think that's kind of opposite of what board members are trying to do, is not keep kids out of school. I think your guys' concerns are that we're maybe too punitive, which I don't necessarily agree with. Again, we've been talking about getting this data and we don't have the data to talk about it. So, as it stands, I think we have to support our stipulated agreements because those are what are getting our students back into school the quickest. It's still a disciplinary action, there's still consequences for it. But if we just ignore these stipulated agreements and vote against them every time, what we're essentially doing is agreeing to a full year expulsion. And as we see from the data that Mr. Harris has provided, those students that take those expulsions without stipulated agreements often don't come back to our district. They either transfer or they drop out. So I just really want to emphasize that this stipulated agreement and the idea of a stipulated agreement, it doesn't really, it's different than the actual disciplinary actions themselves. It's the process of which we approve these, and this way gets our students back to school quicker. So, without not having a consequence.
Thanks, Deb.
Yep.
Mr. Chair, Superintendent. Thank you. Taylor, thank you for bringing up all those details. I think they're really important context. And I want to clarify, one, absolutely students need to be held accountable for breaking the law. We need to provide a drug-free and alcohol-free school environment. And from everything I've heard about the alternative placement program, this sounds way better than past versions, and this seems like exactly where students need to be. My primary concern, or question, I guess, which is, I've used my vote as a way to say, can we discuss this in more detail? I certainly do not think we should expel these students. But for those 10 days, is there a better option? And I know, Mr. Harris, you discussed how truly it is up to 10, and so my question is it 10 days that they are not at school or in alternative placement? Is it up to 10, but normally it's 2 days? And then do we ever consider, are there better places for our students to be during those 10 days? My hunch says that if we are expelling students for 10 days from school because they were smoking weed, they're probably going to go home and smoke more weed. And is it better for them to be in ISS? Or is it even better for them to be in a classroom? It feels really hard to vote in good conscience to remove students from any sort of school setting or support for 10 days as someone who is here to support academics. If these students are truly a threat, they should not be at our schools. If they're perhaps selling drugs or other substances, maybe they shouldn't be in our schools. But if they're just showing up to a high school dance drunk or under the influence, maybe exactly where they need to be is in school for those 10 days, is my thoughts on this and my kind of disagreement with it. Although overall, I really support the idea of providing an alternative to expelling students.
I think you guys both bring up interesting points from a procedural perspective only, right? The administration actually sets the expulsion. That doesn't require board approval. We can change that if we want to, if we need to. But right now, the way it's set up, that doesn't require board approval. What does is the stipulation that we break that expulsion. So that's what we vote on. So as tonight, and we're gonna have another votes on that, overly concerned, but as we did tonight, what that would mean by denying the stipulations, it would be a full expulsion at that point. So we can change that process if we need to or if we want to, but that's how the process currently works. So just to FYI. Other discussion about the expulsion topic.
Yeah, Mr. Chair. I would say that over the last 2.5 years, a majority, not all, but most of the stipulated agreements that have come through for our students are pretty much cut from the same cloth, in that they almost are always the 10 days of OSS followed by the 20 days of ISS, with some exceptions. I think for the most part, it seems like the consequences certainly fit the scenario that our administrative teams are dealing with. But I'm just curious if there is the potential and the need perhaps for more tailoring and customization of those programs. Because I'm wondering, with our highest risk students who come through possibly having a second offense, you know, what do they need at that time and are we providing it? And then with our first offenders, the person who dabbles in the parking lot, I in no way want to condone that behavior, but again, what does that person need and are we providing it? Because when I see a majority of the stipulated agreements come through, I don't want to say that they seem formulaic, but at times I think, what is it about this individual? And what is it that this individual needs? So that has been my concern as I've understood more about stipulated agreements over the last couple of years. You know, are we catching our first-time offenders with the appropriate assist and boost, and also consequence? And are we catching our higher risk students? Thank you.
I hope the administration doesn't feel their necks in a little bit of whiplash right now, because part of the consistency, the cookie cutter approach, was sort of a request from the board at one point, which was, these aren't consistent, they're too flexible, so could we make them more consistent?
Oh, I wasn't on the board then.
So,
It was, yeah, Dr. Hibb was
Yeah.
frustrated with the change, the constants.
yeah, so that's one of the reasons why we're getting that sort of consistency, if you will. Mike, did you?
Mr. Chair, Ms. Brewer, I was just gonna say, yeah, that was previous practice before this standardized up to 10 plus 20 for first offense. It used to be up to 10 plus whatever's left on that semester. So some kids who got in trouble in the beginning of the semester were gone for school for months. And somebody who got in trouble in December had like 4 days off for early Christmas release. So that seemed like a huge inequality, and that's where the board previously said, hey, can we, regardless of the school calendar or when the offense takes place, can it just be something standardized? And that's where the 20 days came in for a first offense, 60 for a second offense. I do think your comment about what are we doing differently during the 20 versus the 60, and are we giving the student the right type of support is a great point. But I do think what we're gonna be faced with is what are the limitations of a public school system in terms of providing treatment for kids who are more than dabbling in illegal substances. Maybe they're now using, maybe even addicted. What is the public school's role in taking responsibility for helping that student treat their addiction or their use of these substances? That's a huge question right now in public education. And, you know, we've had different sources of funding where we can do some things with that. We face some difficulty with availability of providers who can specialize in that type of care for students. So those aren't excuses, but those are the reality of what public schools are facing right now. We do see kids who are using, and without the school, a lot of times they don't get much by way of any sort of intervention. You know, they get law enforcement consequences and they get in trouble, but do they really get any treatment for this pattern of behavior? I would say in most cases it's not what we would hope to do, but again, our mission as a public school district is not to do treatment for kids who are using alcohol and drugs. It's to ensure that they succeed educationally. So we're trying to do what's necessary to get that result for educational benefit, but also not overstep and become sort of a public health agency.
Go ahead, I'm thinking.
Karen?
Just to follow up on that one, that we do have all of our kids cited, so they do have a court obligation as well, where they go through that. And the treatment would come from those resources in the community. I guess my concern with the stipulated orders is we have kids who are under the influence of school, and our first step in our matrix is 6 to 10 days OSS. We don't seem to ever use that. We go right to the stipulated order. At least what we see, we don't know that they've had a previous, if they've gotten in trouble and they've already used that OSS. We don't know. Because we don't always get that information, and so I think that overuse of stipulated orders on all of the first offenses, and that's my concern. And I know we say 30 days, but it's really 6 weeks of school, which is 2/3 of a quarter. So you have a kid who's already struggling, they're in trouble, and then we're gonna take them out of their safe setting and the long school day and all of their peers that are doing their positive, so then we take them out of the school for 6 weeks. And I just think that's too long and a little too punitive, especially when they have court obligations on top of that, and they have their parents, and we should be gathering them in, like I believe behavior is a sign, they're asking for some kind of help, and we're isolating them in a building. I don't know how many of you have been in that building, but it's not the most luxurious building to be out there that doesn't even have a bathroom. So, for 6 weeks in that, I just think that we could be doing better with our first time offenders. And so getting that information, and Melinda was going to be providing a presentation and some information from the State Board of Juvenile Justice. Fortunately, the city's been a little high maintenance lately, so she's in another city council meeting tonight, so I'd like to get some more information, and just having the discussion of like, what are we doing that is preventative? We do that with all of our other behavior in school, like when we have a kid academically struggling, what do? We provide interventions. We find out what the struggle is. We help pushed out to the side, but we should be using it and be teaching it with the same fidelity that we are.
Other comments?
I just have another question, Mr. Chair, about the grid that comes out of our disciplinary explanations. So, and it specifies this nice continuum of consequences for, kind of increasingly critical actions on the part of students, but, and this is just, I don't know, logistics question. I mean, could a student just have the 6 days or 5 days, or I'm going off of my grade here, 6 days in OSS, and could they have a lesser amount in ISS? I mean, is this all navigable, or when the board asked for a very consistent formula, I'm sorry, I keep glancing at all of my administrators, but when the board asked for this, did we just say, yeah, 10, 20, every kid, or do you feel like people or administrative teams have the autonomy to craft a stipulated agreement that might reflect that individual's needs? I guess that was a question. Do they have the autonomy? Do you have the autonomy?
Mr. Harris? Mr. Chair, Ms. Brew, I think to some degree, yes. We would like to start kids at the alternate placement program. If they're gonna do the stipulated agreement, we would like to start them on day one, if at all possible. And sometimes it's very few days before they get in there. Sometimes there are complications with getting a certain type of service arranged for delivery of the alternate placement program. Availability of the student's parents to come and meet. So there are a lot of complications there. But, you know, the 20 days of APP, that's really not something that we've negotiated on the front end of the 10 day, up to 10 days. There is flexibility there, but with the 20 rather on the first offense, that's pretty standard, for what we believe was the board's direction previously, to just keep that standard.
Mr. Chair, at the middle school, we tailored it to 10 plus 15, with maybe an example of, you know, the age level appropriateness. And oftentimes, we do try to get them in to APP as soon as we can. Sometimes the stipulated doesn't always reflect that, because we do the dates that would show the first 10 plus the 15, but we work with Mr. Harris and whoever the instructor is at APP, say, hey, can we get them in earlier? And oftentimes we do. So there is some autonomy there to tailor it, especially for our age level of students. So it's not 10 plus 20 at the high school, it's 10 plus 15.
Would it be helpful for the board if on those STIPs, we had almost a header, if you will, that gave, sort of laid the dates out instead of a narrative form, that gave it a very consistent, you know, this is how many days in OSS, this is how many days in ISS, this is whether it's a first or second or third offense, this is whether they've had any ISS time prior to that. Would that be helpful, just so that kind of almost like at a consistent glance, we know what's going on? Cause for me, I kind of have to read through the narrative and try to figure out, in my feeble brain, do the subtraction of when it happened versus when they're gonna come back and how much time it is, and it might be helpful just to have that on a standardized format. Could we do something like that?
Mr. Chair, we could. My only concern with that is a lot of times students are in trouble and receive different consequences for all types of different behaviors. So it could seem to the parent, to the student, if we put that on the stipulated agreement, that we're gonna bring up everything that's happened this school year. And on top of that, you know, it could be taken as you pile on the kid. They don't like my kid, and that's why we're now at the point where they're kicking him out of school. When it's really about the THC. It's not about the fact that you were tardy so many times or whatever.
Could the board get in, maybe it's not part of the official, step, but maybe it's just an addendum or something that says, you know, here's the quick glance, if you will.
Mr. Chair, members of the board, sure, we could give you that. And there's gonna be a lot of context. We're basically gonna need, I hate to say this, but like an executive session with every single one of these then, because a lot of it is gonna be for tardies, not dressing out for PE.
Yes, that's
You know, and so the context of every kid's situation is absolutely unique. But what's not unique is that if you are using illegal drugs at school, you have a consistent response from the school. And that's what we're trying to do, that's what we've been trying to do. But the context for every student situation is completely different, whether they were alone, you know, they used at school, before school, all those details are.
Is this your gentle way of saying that's not a good idea?
I just would have concerns on how parents would react to that.
Mr. Chair, I guess the most useful information for me would be a first offense versus a second offense. Because a lot of times, sometimes it's stated and then sometimes not, but I think that's an important piece of info. So not necessarily all of the details of.
Yeah, that's right. Mr. Chair, Ms. Wu, I think that I can clue you in on just the code in the stipulated agreement is, if you see 20, that's a first offense. If you see 60, that's a second offense. And when we're dealing with the parents, they know if there's a previous offense, and the administrators know, but that's kind of a shorthand way of not bringing up the previous incident in that current stipulated agreement, but also acknowledging this is a repeat behavior at this point.
That would have been very helpful to know.
Yeah, I apologize if that has not been clear, but the breakdown in December, I tried to put that in there with the disposition bullet points under each of the school years, where it says 10 plus 60, it says repeat offense in parentheses there, so 20 is the standard for first and 60 for 2 at this point.
I was just gonna say, I agree with Mr. Harris that we're getting too complicated and they are individualized, and I think we also just need to trust our administrators, where we still not trust our teachers, and like if they broke a code and there's a violation, we get these stipulated and we just gotta.
It's fair.
Yeah.
My dad used to always tell me, it was a great idea, it just wasn't worth a damn. Fair.
That was you, yep, no, I'm just kidding.
That's fair. Okay. Anything else on this?
I have one other quick question or concern to highlight. A lot of the language in the stipulated agreement states that the student must satisfactorily complete assigned work while in their alternative placement program. And I just want to recognize that some subjects, science labs, culinary, art, music, may be impossible to complete. And I guess I'm curious what we do to support students, and I also want to ensure that students are not unfairly punished because they couldn't participate in a concert while they were in an alternative placement program.
Mr. Chair, Ms. Gans, yeah, that is a concern, like if it's a lab class or there's performances or events like a night at the museum, which happens tonight. So we try our best to keep up to speed on all the different work in the students' classes. There may be some other classes where they need a different form of evidence for that standard, where they couldn't participate in that, in the general activity. And I would defer to Mr. Newendorf or one of the other principals, Ms. Wall, if they want to speak to that, how that works in practicality.
Yeah, I think that's a great question and something that we work really hard at, and our teachers need like a huge round of applause for doing. We have a student in particular that we just dealt with Spanish. And obviously Mr. Show doesn't speak Spanish, or I don't think he does, at least not all the words. And so they're literally figuring out times during that teacher's prep where they can do online, they're video recording his lectures. They're actually allowing that girl to participate via online, so there'll be a Chromebook there where they'll have live conversations, because one of the biggest obstacles is they need to be able to have conversational Spanish. So they'll partner with a kid in the class live at that time, and she'll be able to conversate with the students there. Mr. Brown has been instrumental in the last day or two working with us on a digital art class. So we would have to have a certain type of software to be able to do the digital art class for a student. And so we're able to problem solve that and find a station for that student to be able to continue with the digital art. So we basically bend over backwards to try to make sure that we were accommodating students so that there is no academic loss, and that's really our goal. And we found that that's been pretty darn successful. It's not always 100%. There's certain scenarios where you're at a certain juncture in the class and it's a certain class, so then we'll make an alternative for that student and do those things, so.
Thank you. So are we going to keep discussing this, waiting for the information we get from other resources, or?
That's up to what the board wants to do.
I'd like to continue to gather information if we can, and I would also like to see if we can somehow get information from parents, children who've been through the process. And just, what was helpful, what wasn't. That's something, if we could even somehow invite parents to and actually, and have like an executive session with everyone and then just talk to us, so we can protect their students' confidentiality or something.
That'd be pretty tough, because we'd have to do that
Yeah.
per student.
Or invite parents, okay, but into a setting, so that they could provide information.
Karen, are we, again, is this about the conduct that's being expelled, or is this a stipulated agreement? Because again, I think what your concern is with is more of the behavior and what we are constituting as a first offense, or what constitutes like that expulsion. So if that's the case, I feel like it's not necessarily a stipulated agreement conversation, it's a disciplinary conversation, and then it's maybe a survey out to everybody if the board feels it's necessary. You know, I think about when we do these expulsions and these stipulated agreements, parents have an option not to sign them, and they have an option to also come to us for a hearing. And in the 5 years now that I've been on the board, we've had one hearing in 5 years, or two that I can think of, two. And, you know, most families understand that these are the consequences, these are the expectations, they've been told, their students know. So I guess I have a hard time right now with us not having an increase in our stipulated agreements, us not having an increase in our incidents, us not having a change of what we are going over. I just have a hard time, and I feel like this is just being beat to death, to be honest. And I have a hard time going through this, and this is someone that's a school psychologist and is passionate about this, but if that's where we're gonna go, then it needs to be more on like the disciplinary model. But I feel like just continue to talk about the process that the board is doing with expulsions and stipulated agreements isn't going, I mean, it's not beneficial. It seems like parents aren't frustrated, we haven't had parents complaining about the process, we haven't had, you know, parents refusing to sign. So in my mind, parents would much rather have a stipulated agreement than have their student expelled for a year. And those two cases that we had at the hearing, they were very unique situations. So that's my thought on it, and I'm not trying to be mean or, you know, I'm just saying I think there's a lot of other things that we as a board need to do with our time than continue to belabor these points of a small minority of students that they committed an act that they shouldn't have done, and this is their consequence. So that's my piece on it.
I guess
I see it, Karen, as we're being really friendly and giving them the opportunity to work their way out of a bad position. And if we go back to just expulsion, then it's over. We're not doing anything good for a kid. So it seems to me like what they're doing is pretty, and have been doing for quite some time, is helping the kids. That's what my experience always has been, is that the kids that do come back are pretty good. I think you could argue pretty easily too, if a kid is bold and brazen enough to be drinking or doing drugs at school, it's not the first time that they've done that. They've probably done it somewhere else before too. So if we can catch them and take care of them, help them, I think we're doing a pretty good job with kids. So I too think with the stipulated agreements that we're doing right now, we're saving kids, and we're putting them in better positions, and we're getting them back in school. I think it's a positive.
I do agree that there's some positive to it as well. My concern, like I said before, is that we skipped the first offense. I just would like to know why. Why are we no longer using that if we have it in our behavior matrix? Why are we not doing the 6 to 10 days? Then if they get in trouble again, then yeah, I agree with an expulsion if they do the same thing again. Then the stipulated, so I'm just wanting to have that discussion as a board and our admin team and kind of like figure that out, and how many are first offenses that don't get we skip that step. That's what I want to know.
Mr. Harris, could you address that first offense issue? I'm not really familiar with how that plays out.
Mr. Chair, I have to confess, I'm not really familiar with that either. Is that in the LBHS handbook? Is that where you're seeing that?
And that's on this, that's where she said.
Okay.
The other thing that's interesting is to realize that we're the only district in the state of Wyoming that expels students for a first offense, according to what Melinda Cox said.
Mr. Chair, Ms. Brew, that's not entirely accurate. I surveyed the superintendents from around the state and did your responses from all of them. I got about a third. And there were a couple that did have that. Yeah. And I don't know about their stipulated agreements or what they do, but they do have an expulsion procedure for first time offense for substances.
I was gonna say, I looked through several board documents and board things that I shared with Mike. A lot of districts don't have stipulated agreements, so they are just expulsions, so their first offense, they don't expel. But the second offense is just a straight year expulsion, is what a lot of them were doing.
So what first offenses are they doing in school
They were,
suspensions?
a lot of them were 10 OSS, but it did vary. There was some variation on that, and so if that's a conversation we need to have, I'd be happy to look for that, because I was surprised to see some differences when I did that stuff.
I also think relative to that, we're talking about a semantical difference. You know, we tend to refer to it as like an expulsion. And then once you bring the stipulated in, it's much more of a suspension law than an expulsion law. So I think that semantically we get hung up sometimes on that word expulsion because it sounds so much more scary than it ends up being. You know, really we're talking about a 10-day up to a 10-day out of school suspension, and then a 20-day in-school suspension. The nice thing, in my opinion, about how we handle this, with the expulsion as the overriding punitive action, is that then it gives us the ability to do what's effectively probation for the rest of the year, and with an automatic expulsion when they fail that probation. So the terms of that probation. So I really like the way that we have that whole system set up. I do think that there's a bit of a semantical overload there that gets confusing. If you think of it more in terms of suspension, a 10, 20 suspension, it's, I think, a little easier to digest sometimes.
And sort of piggyback on that, so say you have a kid who gets the suspension, they serve their out of school time, they do their OSS, they go to alternate places, they work their way back, they're back at school, and they skip class. They can be expelled for that rest. So they've already served their time here, they've already done this, and now they're done. Because they skipped class, because of that stipulated order. So like the probationary period, I get that too, but it's like, how much are we gonna keep taking from the kid, you know, like when is their time served?
See, I think it's great to have a short leash at that point.
Yeah, but.
And I think, you know, they're, at that point, they've committed the offense, and then we've said, look, you are on notice that for the rest of this period, you gotta keep your nose clean the whole time. And it might be just as simple as skipping class, right? And I'm, personally, I'm okay with that. I think that's, you know, when you've got a kid that's headed down that road, I think making sure that they're not skipping class is pretty critical, putting them on that notice.
Mr. Chair, Mr. Harris, can you confirm, I mean, does that happen commonly, Brad?
Mr. Chair, Mrs. Jacobs, if you look at the stipulated agreement and suspension expulsion data that I provided, that's in the executive content there, that does not happen. We don't have kids that are on a probationary period who subsequently get expelled, they would show up in that report. Typically, kids do a great job of understanding what's at stake, and they're like, wow, I messed up, I don't wanna go back to APP, I wanna be here, I wanna have the privileges that I normally enjoy. I'm gonna fly straight. If that were not the case, we'd see other kids that were failing the probationary, you'd see them reported in that report, and you'd also probably see multiple reoffenses and things like that, where reoffenses are pretty, actually rare.
Mr. Newdorf, did you have?
Mr. Chair, members of the board, I was just gonna say basically that that's the reality. I think what we do, and we're talking about back here, is like, we will have a kid who maybe goes truant. We don't automatically just like, good luck, 12 months out. It's conversation, but we have that leverage to where now we can like get them into a place that's in a better spot. So could we have more if we were literally zero tolerance and just be like, boom, yes, you're currently failing your English class because it says you have to maintain passing grades in all your classes. That's not how we operate. We use it as that probationary period as a way to keep our hooks in the kids to make sure that they're being able to be successful and find their way to success. And I think our data speaks for itself that that's essentially what happens.
Thank you.
Mr. Chair, if I could, members of the board, I realize it's been some time since we did this presentation, but I wanted to come back to the preventative comment that was made earlier in this conversation. And back in September of 23, we did have a pretty robust presentation. I think Deidre Meyer was the spearhead of that presentation, but she collected data from all of the schools, all of the grade levels on exactly how we hit substance use education prevention throughout our curriculum at all the different schools. We could revisit that. It's probably something we need to bring forward frequently, if not annually at some point, on a regular basis, so that all members of the board are familiar with what we're doing in that area, because it is not something that we're just, I don't know what to do, we are trying to infuse that into the curriculum and hopefully prevent as many kids as we can from dabbling with these different substances.
Okay, so before we move on, where do we want to go from here? Mark, I can tell you're leaning forward. You only do that when you're about to say something.
Well, I don't wanna, I don't have more time to this discussion other than I would love to revote on our earlier stipulated agreement, but.
We'll do that. Thank you. Thanks for the reminder.
I would still just be interested in, hearing the information that Melinda, offered to present, because I think it just makes our understanding a little bit deeper, and certainly would help me. So, and I'm open to further conversation as well, and I think that could be, valuable. I don't see it as a loose ending or a dead end.
Okay. Anyone have a problem with that? All right, we'll wait until we get information, additional information, and once we do, we can get something scheduled. Sound good? Okay. All right, so I'd like to get, I hope to get a motion, even though we're no longer in action, but I'd like to get a motion to reconsider the stipulated agreement as earlier presented.
I'll second.
Okay. Very difficult to have discussion on this, other than to note that if we do vote against it, it would be a full expulsion. So, all those in favor of agreeing with stipulated, passing stipulated motion? Any opposed? Motion carries. Thank you for the reminder. All right, last thing, prevention and needs assessment P&A survey. Mike.
Yes, Mr. Chair, so that item there, I don't know if you remember, it was fall of 23, we were on the board at that time. The prevention needs assessment people asked our district if we would be willing to participate, and after discussion with the board, we declined the option of participating. And so our Fremont One data were not included in that year's P&A survey. And the reason for that was because we already surveyed our students with the Project Work grant, so that information would have statute that required our policy KBB, so we would require parental consent for each participating student. Not that that's insurmountable, but it is a consideration. Asked Edward Barnes, our project aware community project manager, to talk with the counseling team and find out what they would think about participating in this survey. Would it be valuable? Would be a good use of time? And he reported back to me today that the consensus was that unless there are some serious changes to the process, particularly how we gather parent consent, that would probably lead to poor participation if we were to participate, meaning that the data would be hard to be trusted as a valid, reliable representation of where our students are at in terms of overall trends and things. So with a limited amount of actionable insight on the survey, the counselors were not super highly in support of doing the survey this year, but I did want to bring it to your attention and see what you guys thought as well.
And we didn't do it last time because we felt it was yet another needs assessment that our kids have to do, and they're already spending plenty of time testing and or with these surveys and assessments, right? Is that accurate?
Mr. Chair, yes, I think that was a consideration, was the time factor.
What, did you say it's for next school year?
Mr. Chair, Ms. Harms, yes, it'd be for the 2026.
So would it be an option to do something like registration and get most parent consent or no?
Mr. Chair, Ms. Harms, we've already opened that, so we've had hundreds of parents already register their kids. So Lander, for better or for worse, we start our registration process a lot earlier than other places, probably because we want to get a jump on what's our budget gonna look like. So yeah, we'd have to reapproach those hundreds of parents who've already registered their kids and do some sort of a backfill. And again, not insurmountable, but an inconvenience to some degree.
I just think with, especially with us doing the drug testing for our athletes, then it might be good information for us to have, since we're doing that, just to see what students self-report as opposed to what we're funding.
Don't we already, doesn't Project Aware cover some of that already?
Mr. Chair, yes, so the two surveys that are, if you're comparing the PNA survey with the Project Aware survey, they do cover a lot of the same ground.
And we do that one every year, or we just.
We do at the bookends of the grant periods. Beginning, we did the pre-survey, we did a mid-grant update term survey, and we're supposed to do that at the end of the grant survey as well.
Yeah, and then the grant is also then after that, we won't.
After that, we won't have a Project Aware survey.
So we won't have
For 25-26, we would do it in the fall of 25, so we have that school year. But PNA is, this is technically their 2026 survey since it takes place after the year.
So if we say yes to this, we keep the piece survey in the fall and then essentially the second person.
Mr. Chair, Mr. Jacobs, that's correct.
I think, Mr. Chair, my only concern is that this is the only statewide, data gathering that's done regarding these issues, because this is the Department of Health one, correct? So not participating in that, even if our numbers were less than robust, it still leaves a bit of a hole in this state data set, which probably is used to steer programs, funding, and other opportunities for schools.
Mr. Chair, Ms. Brew, I believe the funding that would come from this survey, if there were any, would come to the different county prevention organizations. I think Fremont County Prevention, I think they're pretty wrapped up in this process of getting districts on board for that. I think that's part of the reason. I don't think there's funding that comes from the Department of Health that goes straight to school districts based on this. So I don't think we're not going to jeopardize any funding from the state as a school district that I'm aware of if we don't participate.
But it would be funding that's providing youth services in regards to substance use and abuse within the county?
Not necessarily for youth, but yeah, there's a task force. I don't see principals think I'm more excited to this than I do, but I don't really see the impact of those services in the school district at this point, to be frank.
I see it's just one more thing the kids need to do. I would I don't think that we necessarily get anything additional information out of it. I'm not too worried about the health department, frankly, putting a hole in their survey, although I know they should complain about it, when we don't.
I think if the Department of Ed has information that they want to gather, they'll, request districts to do that, but I just don't have enough information looking at this. I don't know what their sample questions are. It doesn't really say how many districts participate, how big their sample size is. So knowing that we're doing this in the fall with the, Project Aware, I think we could reconsider it in the future if we don't have another mental health survey, but it sounds like there's a lot of information, like you said, that was duplicated, so, I don't see the necessity of that. I mean, here, I'm sitting on the State Board of Education, where we talk constantly about getting away from this type of survey and assessment and putting all this stuff on kids, and I think looking at it from the mental health point is great, but I feel like those are things that our teachers know about our students, local, I just don't think that this is necessarily gonna give us the information. Once it's given to them, do we get to use it in a viable way that's helpful to us to drive programming and placement, or is it just some data that sits, on a chart somewhere that doesn't do anything for us? So I just, without having more information, I have a hard time agreeing or disagreeing with it, so I would just say.
Mr. Chair, Mrs. Jacobs, I just wanted to point out on the second page of that letter, there is a link to pnasurvey.org. And if you go there and click on tools for schools, it has a survey questionnaire on there, so you can review the items if you want. And then I think you can, it's been some time since I went through this site, but I believe there's a way you can check and see some general responses. You may not be able to see district level, but you can see responses from the most recent round of surveys in previous years, I believe.
Mr. Harrison, have you spoken with the admin teams about whether they get value from this tool, or?
Mr. Chair, do you guys remember if we talked about that at the last meeting? I don't think we did. I kind of wanted to see what the counselors thought and what you all thought before that.
Okay.
Are there perspectives they may be willing to share right now?
We've nominated this.
I'm sorry, I know, my opinions are full tonight. Mr. Chair, members of the board, thanks for asking. I raised my hand because I've got 600 kids. This used to be an opt-out, and now it's an opt-in. And that increases the load so dramatically that it's I don't even know how to pull one off, to be honest. With the new legislation and our policy, and even when we go through the registration, we say that you can do X, Y, Z, you have to ask permission for each and every survey that you do, specific to that survey, share the questions out. So all of a sudden, how am I going to make sure, I'm really worried about me and my teachers getting caught in a bind where somebody takes a survey, but their parent didn't sign the permission form. And I don't know how to accurately account for that in trying to manage this where it's not a huge interruption to my school day, to also pull the kids out where their parents said they couldn't take it without disclosing that these are the kids whose parents won't let them take it. So now they become labeled as the kids that are using drugs or whatever the case may be. I don't know how to actually do it anymore. It used to be an opt-out. I would get a list of about 5 or 6 parents who didn't want their parents to do it. We could secretly get them out of class before we administered it. Everybody else stays in class, we hand out the survey, life is over and easy. But with the change of legislation, if they want us to participate in this, and I think the Department of Health should be at the legislator talking about some provisions for that legislation. Otherwise, I think it's probably where it needs to be, which is, I'm sorry, we can't do it. In regards to what we do with that information, I can't speak to that because I don't really, I couldn't trust the information because a lot of it is like self-reported, so you get like this, or you get this because they're pissed off because they should be at lunch, but you're making them answer a survey. So it really just kind of varies so much that it's really difficult. You get the survey information back pretty late. You get it in a larger conglomerate, so it's really tough as far as actionable data. So then it goes, do we ever test a kid where we're not gonna do something with the test and the data? We don't. So then it gets to this with the survey. Why would I get a survey that I probably am not gonna be able to do anything with that data?
Thank you. It's 17 pages? Okay, any other other discussion on this topic? I think we beat this one pretty good. I know that you want to close that and to get this probably okay not doing it. Okay, with that, administrative details, reminders, future plans, April 15th, regular board meeting, and we are adjourned. Thank you.